Hi, I am Angie Chappell, and I am one of the consultants at the State Support Team Region 3. And today I am here to talk with you about the alternate assessment identification indicator 3 in your SPP special education profile data. So if you received this particular finding, I'm going to go through what needs to happen as a result of that. So just to start, some ways to get in touch with us. So we have a website, Twitter, and we have our hashtag on Twitter. Always keeping in mind that our state strategic plan, Each Child, Our Future, focuses on each child, including our children with disabilities, excuse me, or kind of specifically our students with disabilities in these different areas. We also have another document, another plan called Each Child Means Each Child, which is the state plan to improve outcomes for students with disabilities. So this is a great plan to review. There's lots of good information, good data, very specifically to students with disabilities. All right, so let's dig into indicators. So as you know, there are several indicators that are reviewed across the state, and that are also, it's a federal review as well. All of these indicators are grouped and they have different purposes and meanings. Some of them are outcomes and some of them are improvement and some of them are compliance. So indicator 3 fits in with one of the compliance indicators. It's also a disproportionality indicator, but it's talking about answering the question, are children with disabilities achieving at high levels? In alternate assessment participation and performance. Okay, so it's not just about how they do on the assessment, it's about the participation piece as well. And that question is about, are we alternately assessing the right kids? And are we making good decisions about who will participate in alternate assessment? Basically, really, are we making decisions, or how are we making decisions about how children will access assessments? Okay, so we all know that we talk about 1% when it comes to alternate assessment. And so what does the 1% really mean? It's kind of changed its definition over time, kind of how it's calculated, what does it mean? With the changing federal legislation, it has changed. It had been that only 1% count. Each school district had to have 1%, then it went to the state. So now what it really is that each state needs to make every effort to have only about 1% of the students who are tested be counted in with participation in alternate assessment. Okay, so it doesn't mean all kids in all grades, it's just the kids that are in tested grades. And of those kids, about 1% will be alternately assessed. Okay, so, it's not just about that compliance piece and following what is dictated by, the federal government about the 1%, but it's also about the outcomes for kids. Okay, so it does matter, it does make a difference. And there's a nice resource that comes from NCEO, and this is a national assessment organization that helps us to remember that there are outcomes and there are consequences, sometimes good, sometimes bad, consequences around assessment. All kids have to participate in assessment, in state assessments. That's federal, we know that. They have multiple ways of how they access the assessment. They can access those state assessments, which would be the Ohio State tests and of course exams, by just accessing without any kind of accommodations. They can access those assessments with accommodations according to the IEP, or they can be alternately assessed. When kids are alternately assessed, it changes their outcome. It changes kind of the expectation, because they are assessed based on the extended standards, and those extended standards are alternate achievement standards, meaning that they are aligned to the general standards, but they are reduced in breadth and depth. So they are different. They're alternate, hence the alternate assessment. And by them being alternate, it could impact graduation. It could impact training and education and employment after school. And it absolutely can affect military service. Pretty much the military has the option to be able to say that if a student or an individual had an IEP in school, and primarily if they were alternately assessed, the military has, reserves the right to say that that individual cannot serve. So it's really important to make sure you have those conversations and make those decisions about how children are assessed, with data, with, a good conversation, really thinking about the long-term outcomes of or the long-term impact of how kids are assessed. Okay, so just, again, it's not just about those numbers. It's about keeping in mind what's the impact for the learner post-graduation. So just a little, this is some good news. Okay, so we're going to get a couple of slides of really good news, and that is that, as you can see, our graduation rates for students with disabilities by standard requirements, meaning that they are graduating by the same pathways as their peers without disabilities, is on the rise. Okay, and this is due in part to the fact that we have alternate pathways to graduation. One of the things that has happened in the past, where you can see we're in the 30s, is that kids with disabilities would be assessed with or without accommodations, and they would not pass that assessment. So sometimes what happened is that they would then be alternately assessed, or they would be excused from the consequences of the assessment. By excusing kids from the consequences of the assessment, you have now changed their graduation pathway. Their outcome has changed. When kids are alternately assessed, it changes their outcome. It changes their pathway. They are not graduating by the standard requirement. They're not being held to the same standard. Okay, so what happens is the federal graduation rate reduces. Those kids are not counted federally as graduates. And kids who are alternately assessed are in that mix. So what you're seeing here is we have this nice upward trend. So again, partly due to the fact that we have multiple pathways to graduation now, which is amazing. And if you want more information about that, let me know, because myself and my colleague Bob Ross and Linda Thayer, we have lots of great information about the graduation pathways. We'd be happy to support you with that. But it's also due in part to the fact that we have reduced the numbers of kids who are being alternately assessed, because we have better tools and resources to be able to make those decisions. Okay, so you can see this upward trend in graduation, and I'm going to go to this one. We have a downward trend in the numbers of kids, or the percentage of kids who are being alternately assessed. So as you can see, back here in 1920, we were way up here. We were at 1.8. And we have reduced it now to 1.4. So we're on the right path. Okay, I'm going to go back one. This also kind of shows, and this doesn't include this year's data. I didn't have the ability to do the graph before I got the data for, or actually for last year. But we're on the path. Okay, we're moving up. So we're still here. We're still, in the, at that 50 place. We're moving up to 58. If we keep on going on the path we're going, we keep looking at those alternate pathways for kids to be able to graduate. We keep reducing the numbers of kids who are alternately assessed, and we're going to bring that rate up, and that's what we want to do. Okay, so again, the importance of this 1% is that it impacts several pieces. It's not just about bringing those numbers down to 1%. We're below 1% or around 1%. It also increases graduation rates, it increases post-school outcomes, it increases opportunities. Okay, so it's just something to consider. All right. All right, so let's jump into this indicator. All right, so indicator 3B, excuse me, is alternate assessment participation for reading and math. Okay, and there are several factors that will trigger a finding here. So what happens is there's tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 components of this particular indicator. And these are some of the factors that flag someone for being tier 3. So if you're listening to this, then you were included in that tier 3. I will also work with the districts that are tier 2 to try to make sure that you don't move into that tier 3 place, or to kind of bring you down to tier 1. Tier 1 means that you're hovering around 1% and that any of these other factors were not included. Tier 3 means that several of these factors were impacted. Okay. And for your own individual district, if you want to know what those are, I can let you know that. But for this particular video, we're just going through the general information. Okay. So each one of the indicators this year, there are indicator manuals, so there's always been there's one giant manual that had every piece of information in it for every indicator. Now they're broken out by indicator. So you don't have to rifle through everything to find your information for your particular indicator that you have a finding and that you have to have some actions around. Each one of them has their own. So the alternate assessment manual, okay, you'll see it says alternate assessment indicator manual. And when you have this, you see this video, we'll give you the links to everything as well. So you'll have a copy of the PowerPoint and you'll be able to access everything through the PowerPoint, because everything, as you can see, is linked. Okay, so within the manual, you just look at the table of contents. It's interactive. Wherever you click, it'll take you. So it talks about the overview of the information. It goes through the self-review summary report, the improvement plan, and then your actions and kind of what you need to do and submit. Okay, and I'll go through each of those pieces. We kind of talked about the why. You've already learned about the monitoring system and how to upload everything by coming to the general session. And so now we're going to get into the self-review summary report, the improvement plan, and the actions. Okay, just before we get started, those important dates. April 1st, your self-review summary report and improvement plan are due. And this is an indicator that has required participation of your state support teams. That would be me. So we'll be touching base and talking and making sure that we're working together to get that the SRSR and the improvement plans completed by April 1st. And then verification of training. So anything that you put into your improvement plan, and that's that kind of systemic piece at the end, is due September 30th. So all of the pieces that you put it, all the actions that you have and your goals that are set for your improvement plan, you have to have verification of all of that by September 30th. Okay, so the self-review summary report, again, it's a process, right? You want to make sure that you have a team, really important, okay? And your team looks at each one of the questions and discusses it, and you make some determinations about, is this an area of concern? Then you determine a root cause based on data, based on conversation, based on the information that you've gathered, and then you rank each one of those concerns to determine if it's going to be included in your improvement plan. Okay, so let's look at what that looks like. So this is a screenshot of the self-review summary report. And there are questions that go through. So there's some data reporting questions that are always first in section A. So if you had a data reporting error, you wouldn't be needing to do this. So if you're here, that would mean that was because you were you had that tier 3, one of those issues that I showed you earlier about why you would be tier 3. And we have to move forward with the SRSR and the improvement plan. So we would start with section B. And the first part of section B, question 4, is only if you've had a finding in the past 3 years in this same area. So if you had an alternate assessment participation flag finding in the past 3 years, then you would complete section 4. And it's looking at what did you do in the past and how can what worked, what didn't, and what can we continue to do and what do we need to do differently. And then moving into question 5, and you'll work your way all the way through all the questions in the self-review summary report. You're looking at data, you analyze that data, and then you make a decision if this is an area of concern. You determine a root cause, and then after we're done with all of those, then you'll go back through and prioritize. So this is the actual self-review summary report. So the first part is your team. Again, this is not a one-person deal. This is a team. So you want to get a cross-functional team, including central office, maybe some administrators, general ed, special ed. Okay. There's some info about how to do it. Again, like I said, the first part is only if it's like a data appeal. If you have not done that, then that's why you're here. So then you would move on to section B. 4 is only for those that had a finding in the past 3 years. We move into the questions. You have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There are 9 questions. Okay. Many of them have multiple parts. And a big part of this is, okay, so policies, procedures, and practices, training, and I'm going to talk about training a little bit more in a minute. There's some family involvement questions. Are you involving families in your decision making? Okay, more about the data gathering, and there's another piece to this, which is there's a disproportionality calculator. So as you're looking at this data, you're going to also want to include it in that calculator, and I'll show you that in just a sec. Okay, and there it is right there. So then you have to complete that disproportionality calculator. So you're going to gather all of this data, which will then go into that calculator. Okay, then as you start to look at this and you do some analysis, that's when you're going to make a determination. Is this a concern? And then if so, what is the root cause? Okay, and again, we'll walk through this together. Oops. Okay, so we just saw the self-research report. I'm going to show you the calculator. So the disproportionality calculator, you have some instructions on the first page. And then it's broken out by area. So you would look at your data for ELA, math, science, and then there's a summary section. And you look at your data over time. You see that it starts back in 17, goes through 23. You're only going to fill in the data that you have. You're going to want to go back at least a couple of years in your data. Okay, so if we're looking at this year's 2022, or you look at last year's, 2021, and you look at last year's 2020, 19, that's enough information to make some decisions. But if you want to go all the way back, you do that. So you're entering data, disaggregated data, based on different factors for which students were alternately assessed. Okay, and then as a result of that, a risk ratio is calculated to let you know if you are at risk for being disproportionate for any particular subgroup or group of children to be considered to be alternately assessed. Okay. So, and you'll notice that, and this also says in the direction, any place where there's a little red tab, those are things that will be calculated for you. Anything that does not have those tabs, those are places where you can enter that information. Okay, and again, we'll go through this together in depth. Okay, and then the other thing is, you notice that there was it's a verification of training. So one of the factors that was included in the self-review summary report, it asked about training. So is everyone trained? Does everyone understand the participation criteria? And that participation criteria is based on the participation tool, participation decision-making tool. This was introduced a couple of years ago. It was required this past year. So I would imagine that most folks have a good understanding, or at least have adequate understanding of this tool. It's not new. The requirement piece came out last year, and the way that it's laid out looks a little different from a couple of years ago, but it is the same information. The participation requirements and participation criteria have not changed for determining how children are assessed and determining if children should be alternately assessed. But one of the pieces of this is to receive training. And again, we can include that in your plan, and we can talk about that and plan that out. But having training for your staff in this tool is a requirement. Okay. All right. So then the improvement plan. So then from the SRSR, that summary report, you have a summary, which includes your root cause. That's the first part of your improvement plan. Then you have, if you have a part B, and that's question 4, if you had some information from previous years, if you'd had this finding in the past, you do that reflection. Otherwise, you do not. You create a long-term goal and a short-term goal. Okay, long-term goal is how are you going to sustain this, whatever plan you put in place, and the short-term goal is what are you going to do to rectify the situation right now. All right, and then you come up with, whoops, I'm so sorry. Then you come up with these activities. Okay, and so it talks about that there are certain things that you need to do. So you need to review policies, procedures, and practices. You need to do the DISPRO calculator, and we need to do training. There may be other things that you want to do. There may be other activities that you need to put in place, and that is perfectly fine. Okay, but those first 3 are three things that have to happen. Okay, so we have to do a review of policy, practices, and procedures. So that would potentially include making sure that there is a policy, practice, or procedure about how the tool is used. Okay, and there may be a new policy, practice, or procedure, depending on what you find in your disproportionality calculator, about how you are providing services for children, and maybe even specific to subgroup. Okay, and then the training piece again is about the training on the tool and any other training that you need based on what you find in your self-review summary report. One of the pieces of training is definitely on the tool. Additional training may be required. It may be about graduation, it may be about outcomes, maybe about disposition, and that can be decided, and that training would be included. Okay, you'll have a timeline. How will we know you did it? And then the resources and the people who will be responsible. Okay, SST is required to be involved in this, both the SRSR and the improvement plan. And so at the end, you'll have my contact information. Please reach out. Let's make sure that we get a plan in place and we start to work on this so that we can have everything in place and done when you need it done, and that we can make sure that there is a good plan training in place for making sure that you have a good way of determining how to assess children in the correct way. Okay, so again, improvement plan. We talked about this. The summary, the reflection, you have those goals, those pieces that need to be in place. There's that calculator again, there's that tool again. So you see, there's just those handful of items that are required within this alternate assessment finding. There's also a few other resources that we wanted to give to you. So there are these target setting videos, and then there's again, the indicator review manual, but these target setting documents and videos, it'll link you to a folder that goes through how targets are set, why they're set, what they are for each one of the indicators. And there are those 20 plus indicators. Not every one of them has actions attached to it. Some of them are outcomes, some of them are improvements, some of them are compliance. So there's lots of different findings, there's lots of different indicators, and those targets are set for each of those indicators every year. They're looked at, and this video and these documents show you how that happens, and how the input goes in and how feedback happens. So they're just a good tool to look at to be able to understand where these targets are coming from. And there's me. So if you're watching this video, that means that you have this finding. If you have this finding, we need to set something up so that we can start working on your SRSR and your improvement plan. We can set up the trainings, we can work on the policies and procedures, whatever it is you need. Yeah, so there's me. Reach out. We'll make sure that we get this taken care of. And I look forward to hearing from you. If you have any other questions in the meantime, please feel free. That is my cell phone that I put on there because there's only a handful of us looking at this. Please don't share that out with the world. That's just for us that are watching this video. All right, and reach out to me if you need me. Okay, thanks so much.